All right, so we're. I hit the wrong button and killed it. Sorry. Oh boy. And I don't know what I was talking about, so I'll just start over again. We're talking about my blood sugar. We won't do that again. So it's the 25th of June. It's Tuesday. The name of this broadcast is Noon+15. It's a Simulcast. Would you believe? Over 3 networks. Facebook Live, Netbook Live, and YouTube Live. And YouTube Live, I must say, is the most reliable of the 3. Every once in a while, the other, one or the other, or both, it ends up to be not a Trimulcast. It could be a simulcast of 2, a simulcast of 3, or just a broadcast over YouTube. But, you know, what are you going to do? So everyone's all exercised about this debate coming up on CNN. Because fake Japper, that's what Trump calls him. Instead of Jake Trapper, it's fake Trapper. Yeah, he has these little nicknames for whatever he's talking about. Maybe it's a way of him. Maybe it's a memory tool, because fake rhymes with Jake, and he can't quite remember Jake, but he remembers fake Japper. Anyway, so. Fake Japper does not like Trump, and he's one of the moderators of the upcoming, what do you call it? Just lost Facebook. We'll see how long Twitter hangs in there. But we got YouTube Live. You can end up getting the Facebook thing, but it's it's not live anymore. It'll just be, you get the recorded one, I think, when it's all done. I think it. I'm not too sure about how that works. Anyway, so here's the article. You can see it over here on the right. Oh, there goes Twitter. Oh boy! All right. Now we have a broadcast with, I should have the right to, let's see if I got the right output. We'll do one of these tests. I can do that. Yeah, there it goes. So that's my upload speed on the internet, which I'm sharing with our live broadcast here, which shouldn't interfere with that, I hope. Yeah, I'm still. Yeah, I got plenty of upload speed. I'm at that's 43 megabits per second. All right, we can stop it. I don't need that much. Yeah. All right. Well, I was getting, I need 7 or 8 megabits per second, and I'm getting about 40. So that's 40 is more than 7, right? So we should be in like Flynn. Anyway, so this author of this article is Scared SHETLESS. You can fill in. Scared to the buttons about Thursday. And Hunter Biden's law license has just been revoked because he has a gun conviction, convicted of all 3 counts, if you remember. So, in due course, the Justice Department wheels move slowly. So his law license is gone. It doesn't matter. He's broken so many rules. he's engaged in all this influence peddling with his father. Millions and millions of dollars, over $20 million. And he hadn't registered as a foreign agent, so he's broken that rule. But who's going to prosecute him? You think the Justice Department is going to go after the president's son? I don't think so. Particularly, they're all a bunch of liberals. Anyway, so Robert Reich wrote this story. It says, I'm 78 today, and I'm scared shitless about what might come down Thursday evening when the oldest candidates ever to compete in a presidential race debate each other. I'm less worried that Joe Biden will suffer any mental lapses, because he's probably going to get a shot in the bupkis about some stimulants of some kind, so that he can stand for 90 minutes, much less not stumble and wobble. So anyway, Robert is less worried about him standing for an hour and a half as it is Donald Trump, going wild on the microphone. That can get cut off. So he'll be asked difficult questions, and, Biden will be asked softball questions. So the nice thing about a debate is the moderator can ask a question, and then you can immediately phase right into what you want to say instead of answering his question. And then he can argue back and forth with the moderator, about whether he's answering his stupid question. So you'll have to figure he's a performer. Trump, he just, what he has to remember is it's not a matter of winning or losing a debate. It's a matter of just keeping grips with yourself and, be politeful, be presidential, and mind your P's and Q's, and just do your XYZs. It's, don't go off on a tangent. Don't go screaming and yelling on, because you have to show that you're capable of, being a stable, leader of mankind. So iPad OS. That's what that means. iPad OS. The operating system for the iPad. Version 18 Beta 2. Brings third-party app stores and more to the iPad, as Apple seeks to comply with the European Union's digital DMA's Digital Marketing Act. Digital Marketing Act. The EU, European Union Digital Marketing Act. So, when the iPad OS is going to comply with what they want, they just go ahead and do the same thing for the U.S. markets, rather than having two versions of iPad OS. There's too many, people travel back and forth, and it would be, very annoying if you had a UK, if you were a U.S. customer, and then you go to the UK and your iPad doesn't comply with the Digital Marketing Act of the European Union. Then, how's that work? Then it's going to say you're out of country and you can't log into something, so they just comply with the world order, Anyway, so iPad OS, the iPad OS 18 Beta 2 has been released. And this was 53 minutes ago from about 2 hours ago. So this morning. Yep, there it is. So that's I have an iPad right here, and I have that same keyboard. Something happened to my iPad, and I have an insurance policy. It just stopped working. So I got a hold of my insurance company that I have my devices insured with, and you see this nice dark. I figured I'd get the dark color, see what that looks like. So they replaced my iPad, and since they didn't have any more, because my iPad is 3 years old or something like that, they had to send me a new one. Oh my God, a brand new one, rather than an old one that was in inventory, because my policy says they replace it with a new one. No, it doesn't have to be a new one. It has to be a new, version of the iPad that I had. But apparently they ran out of those in the warehouse, so they had to send me the new one that they had to send me. They sent me a brand new one, meaning the new iPad that they just released. So that was a nice surprise. The what do you call it? The copay. They call it a copay. It was like $300, so I had to shell out $300. But I got a new iPad, which was worth $2,000, because I have the largest memory and the fastest to this and that. So I got the most memory and the 1 terabyte of storage. I think you can get a new iPad with 2 terabytes of storage, but see, they won't send that. So they sent me a brand new iPad that's currently new, in the world marketplace, which is capable of being purchased with 2 terabytes. But since the one that stopped working had 1 terabyte of storage, they only give you the replacement as 1 terabyte, and they don't offer you the ability to mark it up to a larger size. So anyway, I'm delighted. So the new keyboard is very nice. It has a whole row of buttons on the top that increase the volume, and you can lock your device. You hit that button and it's locked, and you hit the button again and then it unlocks, with your Face ID and all that stuff. The camera is in the middle instead of on the side, so when you're on a conference call or something, instead of it looking sideways at you, it's like when you look someone straight in the eye, but they're looking in another direction. So they moved the camera from the side to the top, middle, so that when you have it mounted on the keyboard, you would normally have it in this horizontal landscape mode instead of straight up and down. Now with an iPhone, you might hold it straight up and down, and the camera's straight up, in the middle on the top. But the iPad, it's usually mounted on one of these keyboard thingies, and a keyboard case, or any kind of case, and the camera's up here in the middle, which is pretty nice. Anyway, so that's how I ended up with one of these. Otherwise, it would have cost me, can you imagine, $2,100 plus the tax on $2,100? Holy mackerel, that's a lot of money. But that's why you get insurance on these things, because if you drop them, you're walking around the pool and whoop, you slip in the water. That's and it says goodbye to the iPad. I think your iPhone can stand being underwater, like 6 feet for 30 minutes, and that's it. IPX, 678, one of those. But I understand the iPhone can be underwater, I think 6 feet for 30 minutes. So if you drop your phone in the pool in the shallow section, you can jump in the water and get it out of there, and your iPhone is likely going to be A-OK. They don't have a jack in it for headphones anymore. It has to be Bluetooth. So the only opening protrusion that they have is, with the where you plug in, the USB-C cable, if you're so inclined. I charge my phone generally on this magnetic charging thing, and there's a coil inside here that picks up, the coil on this thing, and it charges, not quite as fast as if you plugged it in, but I can always plug it in the wire. I have a couple of USB-C wires plugged in here to power these older iPads that I use as support for this broadcast, actually. Anyway, so that way when I'm talking about things, you can see it over here on the side. This is something that's newsy-woozy. Is Celine Dion. She doesn't look very good in this picture. Oh my God, she looks terrible. And she has this message. Let's see if I can highlight this and have it talk to me. Speak.
Celine Dion. Celine Dion.
No, it's in because I have it plugged into the machine here, and let's see. Do I have it? It looks like I could have it talk. Let's see. Let's try that again, just in case. Speak.
I am Celine Dion. Celine Dion.
It is talking. Hey. Behave. Play through. Let's try that. Let's check that mark and do this again. Speak.
I am Celine Dion.
Yep.
Celine Dion.
Let's try that a little more. Speak.
I am Celine Dion. Celine Dion wiped away tears as she discussed.
Let's try this again. I'm trying to get this. Speak.
I am Celine Dion. Celine Dion wiped away tears as she discussed.
Let's see. Let's try one more thing here. Producers? That's over my... All right. I can't do it. Anyway, she is getting on to with the story. She's upset, rightly so, because she is publicly announcing that she has stiff person syndrome. She's been diagnosed with stiff person syndrome, and that's something that it's a rare neurological condition that most commonly causes stiff muscles, and all of a sudden you stiffen up, or you have spasms, with your vocal cords, or and she's a performer singer, so stiff muscle syndrome is something that you don't want to have. to say the least. So that's all I know about that. Can I get my arrow back over here? Gosh darn it. Let's see if I do this. There we go. Oh, boy. Now let's turn it on back on again. My cat is calling me for something. Yeah. Hey, calm down there, pretty cat. She knows I'm busy, and the cat wants 100% of my attention. So she wants something. It's time for her lunch. Lunch? Yeah, well, you're gonna have to wait because I'm talking to everybody out here in Radioland. Well, the EV giant Tesla Inc. has once again opened the option for its customer to transfer its full self-driving capability. Which, they opened it, like the last quarter of last year. Which means, if you bought a Tesla, as I guess it would include lease. I don't know how that would work. And you paid $8,000 for the full self-driving, built into your car, essentially with forever updates and so forth. Well, what happens in 3 or 4 years, 5 years, when you want a new Tesla? You got the software for the full self-driving that you paid an $8,000 premium for. Is it stuck in the old car? Well, what if you trade the old car in? The software goes away? Does it? So, the last quarter of last year, there's enough people that were PO'd with that likelihood that the software goes away with the car. Whenever you decide to get rid of the car, sell it to someone else or whatever. And if you sell it to someone else, you don't want to sell the software, the full self-driving piece. And for God's sakes, it's really not fully functional yet. Anyway, so Elon Musk or the board or both decided in their wisdom they're going to allow you to transfer your software to your new car. I mean, how do they not? Because it's, it's like if you get new tires, it's not like you can take the new tires with you. Well, the software is different. The software is, it's something that's downloaded. They can turn it on. They can turn it off. They update it. You don't actually have to buy it anymore. You can just sign up for $100 a month, and you can use the full self-driving, to take yourself to, going to drive from Florida to Maryland. And that would be it. You drive to Maryland and back. And the whole thing routes with the full self-driving software, takes you on the highways, keeps you in the right lanes, takes you off to the nearest and most appropriate charging station when your fuel tank runs, into the 20% mark. That's time to get it filled up, so to speak. Choosing my words carefully because with an electric vehicle, it's not like a gasoline. You don't fill up the tank with fluid. You fill the fuel reservoir with energy. You fill it with energy. And it takes about 15, 20 minutes to fill it up. Fill up the tank. So, that's no big deal. The charging stations are usually attached to their own coffee shop or someone else's coffee shop like a Starbucks or whatever. And so you plug in the charger, and you lock your car and you go take a hike. You go to the little boy's room and, tinkle or whatever. Wash your face, wash your hands. Get out of the restroom, dry your hands, walk into the coffee shop or the trinket shop, the donut shop, or whatever kind of shop is, nearby, because the Tesla things are usually, in the same parking lot as some kind of a convenience store-y, coffee, whatever kind of a place. That makes sense for, someone who's going to go off the highway to go get a fill-up, whether it's electric energy or hydrocarbon energy. Energy is energy, the way I look at it. And electric energy is one of the purest forms of energy, particularly if it comes from a fusion reactor. That's on the way. I understand the second fusion reactor is just finished being built. They're working on a fusion reactor, to be in submarines, which, the thing with nuclear reactors, changing the topic, is, and we haven't built one in, 20 or 30 years, which is stupid. And all these green people are running around. Well, in order to be able to charge all these cars, you're going to need to have some, more sources of electric energy. And nuclear is the answer, and fusion reactors are the answer. And the big advantage, and to keep this in, colloquial terms, instead of, I was trained as a, physicist, chemist, mathematician person, biochemistry, with a minor in math and a double major biology and chemistry, because I was going to be a pre-med student, but I didn't end up doing it for a stupid reason, which I'll get into at another time. But anyway, so since I'm scientifically inclined, the difference from a sociological United Nations, including our own nation perspective, you got fission reactors and fusion reactors. Well, a fission reactor is the kind of reactor that everybody kind of knows about today. A fission reactor, which basically, you got, neutron rods that go down there to cool everything down, and you got this nuclear material that is, gets very excited and heats up water, and that water goes over to, and creates steam, and steam goes over to a steam generator. The generator turbine, goes around and around and creates massive amounts of, megawatts of electricity. Okay? Well, so what's the negative with nuclear reactors? Well, one negative is if the cooling rods, which absorb neutrons, I think I got that right, absorbs something so that the nuclear reaction, will not overheat and boil all the water that's surrounding the nuclear material. Okay, well, what if those rods get pulled and don't get put back in? The rods get lowered into the nuclear reactor tank. If those rods, are how deep they are in the water where the nuclear material is, it absorbs or doesn't absorb, the output of the nuclear reaction, to keep it under control, so to speak. All right. So after 10 years, let's just use that. After 10 years, the nuclear material gets worn out. The electrons and neutrons and protons, it gets old and stale, and then replace it because it has to work up to a certain standard, or else the electric generation won't be consistent. You have brownouts and that kind of thing. So you have to replace. Let's just say it's over 10, 20 years. It's decades. Let's say 20 years. So after 20 years, you replace the nuclear material with fresh nuclear material, which it's uranium of some sort, I believe. And there's all kind of different varieties of uranium. So then the old uranium they put in a lead container, and I guess lead absorbs the radiation, so that if they just pulled it out of the, so they submerge, I imagine, this big lead canister, and then, crane picks up the nuclear material and then drops it in the lead container, and then a cover is put on it, and then this whole thing that weighs, thousands of pounds gets pulled out and put on a truck, and then it gets a big truck with, a crane and stuff, and then that nuclear material is then stored somewhere. Well, no one wants it. So that's one problem with nuclear reactors is, what do you do with the nuclear waste that you're not going to use anymore because it's all worn out and there's not an alternate use for it, or currently. Well, all right. So that's the issue with the traditional fission, FISSION, fission reactors. Okay, so over 10, 20-year periods of time, you got to replace the nuclear material, and then of course you have the old nuclear material that's all worn out but still radioactive, for 10,000 years. So you put it in a container and you can bury it somewhere, for example. Seal it up. Put it in a huge canister of concrete. And then transport that to somewhere in a desert. But, a desert is, in the backyard of some state. Nevada doesn't want it. Arizona doesn't want it. Western California doesn't want it. So all those desert areas, Colorado doesn't want it. They don't want the nuclear waste. So that's a problem. And what do you do with the waste? So Congress would have to work on that. But with fusion reactors, FUSION, fusion reactors, there's no nuclear waste because with a fusion reactor, the actual amount of the radioactive material, instead of being depleted, it grows. So you end up with more nuclear material than you started with. Cool. That's why they call it fusion, because helium atoms and whatever atoms, tritium atoms, they fuse under this extreme pressure and heat. The fusion reaction, which is controllable, it's taken us. I mean, I read about this, 40 years ago, 40 years ago, and they were talking about it, from a theory standpoint, and theoretically they had it all worked out. Well, they've actually created. There was a international consortium of scientists that compiled talent and money, and they built a fusion reactor in somewhere in Japan, I believe, and it's now been running. They were testing it for a couple of years, and well, it hit the headlines, not too long ago. And see if I can see my little. I'm paging you. If you see on the, there we go. Bingo. Let's hit this one right here. The world's largest nuclear fusion reactor, set to reshape global energy production. And there it is. That's the one they built in Japan. And you can see it's a massive thing. It's 3 stories high and 2 stories wide. It's big. It's huge. I have a picture of it without the writing. There's it's a little sharper image. I'm an image guy, so you can see that's really something. And you get all kinds of support. These are different levels. People walk around these. These are, they give you an idea. A person, to walk on some of these platforms, you can see it's built for human beings to walk around on. So I can just imagine it's probably 4 stories high, and it's probably 2 stories underneath ground. And this is a big chamber. It's pressurized, so that's why you see the symmetry. These cables, are transmitting signals or fluids, or it's probably electrical, because it's a huge magnets, that control and shape the plasma that's in there. That's heats up this material, to like 10 million degrees. That's, hotter than the sun. So that's what's going on inside this thing, this huge canister. And I'm sure you can see some of these pipes, something to do to manage the reaction so that it doesn't run away and melting down or something. So I don't know enough about the engineering of this fusion reactor, but that's what it looks like. And I don't think there's any persons floating around in this picture. I think everybody's out, so to speak. But this opening right here is the size of somebody going to walk inside there when it's all shut down. When they first manufactured it. I think once they get one of these suckers going, it keeps going, and it keeps going for basically forever until they turn it off. And there are ways of shutting it down. So that's the first fusion reactor. Located, in Japan somewhere. I forget where. But you can see there, now you're on the ground floor looking up. And you can see that it's, 1, 2, 3 stories up, floors. I'll just say stories. So it's like a 3-story office building inside this huge building. And there's a huge amount of electromagnetic energy. I'm sure you can't get anywhere near this thing, with anything around your wrist or your rings or, anything that's, conducts electromagnetic energy. You don't want to be wearing it. It might just melt your finger off. So there's a lot of electromagnetic energy floating around, something like that. Anyway, so if any of you guys remember anything about your chemistry, here's what's the difference between fusion and fission. Fission, you have an atom and it breaks it up and energy comes out. That's over on the right side of this picture. That's nuclear fission. So that's why, it gets bombarded by neutrons, and a larger atom then becomes smaller atoms. When that happens, energy is also released. Okay? So when they put the rods in a fission reactor, when they put the rods that are lowered down into this chamber that controls the nuclear material, those rods absorb neutrons. I had that right from memory a long time ago. And so the fewer neutrons that are floating around, the fewer atoms are being bombarded, and the energy level drops. But if they pull the neutron absorbing rods out of the nuclear array, then more neutrons are floating around, and bombard into material, and it breaks it up into several particles, and energy is also released. Okay, so that's what happens with fission. This process goes on and on and on, for several decades. Maybe it's a 20 or 30 year life, of the nuclear material, and then it runs out. Well, then you got to, then it gets old, and you got to replace it. That's the problem with fission reactors. You got to deal with the spent nuclear material. It's spent for the purpose of creating electric energy, anyway, by steam turbines. And over here, we can see fusion reactors. So that's a fusion reactor. So they're dealing with tritium and deuterium, and those combine to create helium, and energy is released. And it goes into just a cycle, and it goes around and around and around, and energy keeps on, coming out, and you end up with more deuterium and tritium than you started with. And then, of course, that can be broken, and then it produces energy, and on and on and on, with the neutron bombardment in a fusion reactor. And it's under extreme high pressure and heat, like millions of degrees. And anyway, the energy that's produced would then create steam, and steam drives the turbines of either kind of reactor. But the fusion ones don't wear out. You end up with more material than you started with. All right. So this is what is known as the holy grail of clean energy. The fusion reactor. So a fusion power station that generates 1,500 million watts of electricity could only use about 2 pounds, 2.5 pounds of fuel, as opposed to 10,000 tons of coal. That's 10 million pounds of coal. Okay. Well, tons is it would be 20 million pounds of coal. That's a lot of coal. And you only need 2.2 pounds of tritium. So a fusion reactor keeps going and going and going. Now, eventually, apparently, you have to replace some of the material in a fusion reactor. So, here's some, plasma and exhaust diverter. You can see all this engineering. I'm leaving it up here so you can always go back and look at it. I don't want to stay on because everybody will immediately go to sleep. And we don't want our audience to go to sleep. We want to keep them stimulated. So here's, I'll tell you what, we're talking about, science and technology. I'll tell you what I'm worried about. I'm worried about the Boeing, the two astronauts that went up in the Boeing Starliner, because now they're stuck in space, in the space station, and the Starliner, this thing on the top that detaches, from the booster, first and second stage boosters and all that. This little capsule on the top, and this is like a thing that connects the storage thing behind with the capsule in the front, and that peels away, and you end up with just this capsule thing. They're gray looking doodad, which you've seen over the years. The shape. Well, it's leaking. They have up to like 5 leaks now, and some of them are helium leaks, and others are leaks, with the propellant. And the problem with that is, the little I know about these things, but I'm just going to imagine what the problem is. And if I was an astronaut, I'd be very angry. Oh boy, this thing, number one, it's 2 years late in blasting off to begin with. This is supposed to have happened in 2022. And then when it was ready, on the launch pad and all that kind of stuff, so it got delayed 2 years. And then when it finally gets all set up and the rocket is full of, liquid oxygen and then which is the oxidizer, and then the fuel itself is loaded into this big missile. And you got two side solid fuel rockets that are attached to the booster to give it an extra boost. It sat on a launch pad, and they had to defuel it at least once that I know of, and it had like 3 or 4 delays. It couldn't launch because they had this, that, and then the energy, and then the communications between the computers and the onboard computers and the and the off-board computers, and oh God, what a mess. Well, it finally launched. It launched properly, and then when the capsule part, the top part here, including everything that you see here, except this second stage that breaks away, and you just have this part, which you can see with my finger, going up right to there, right to that ring looking doodad. This all together, wiggles its way over towards the space station, and the space station connects right here in the tip, and the door opens up once it's connected. Well, it couldn't. It took several times to line up with the space station, and as they were maneuvering in space, and it's moving closer to the space station, they said halt, and they had to stop because it wasn't lining up right. It was coming in too fast. Whatever, they had to stop it and bring it back, 15 or 20 feet or meters, or however I want to describe it. So they had it back up, 3 or 4 meters. A meter is 39 inches, so If you're in feet and inches, you can do the math yourself. Anyway, so they had to pull it back, 3 meters. And they said, okay, you need to line up this way, line up that way. And then you got to come in at a slower velocity, so the bolts and the collar and all that stuff and the seal, because, they're pressurized containers, so that I think it pressurized to like, let's say, 6 psi. We normally live down here at 14.6 pounds per square inch of pressure because of the weight of our atmosphere. So our whole body, everything here at sea level is 14.6 pounds per square inch. That's the STP, the standard pressure at sea level. Okay, if you get below sea level, like you're in a canyon or something, it might be 15 pounds per square inch, or maybe even a little more, depending on how far underneath sea level you are, which is an untalked about, something that's not talked about when you go into the Grand Canyon, because you're going to experience more pressure all around your body, which is going to upset your circulation, yada, yada, and some people don't survive that, I'm told. And some of the medical conditions could be that you're experiencing these higher pressures. Anyway, so when you're in a space capsule, I think you're at 6, maybe 5.8, but let's say 6 psi, just to pick a number. I don't think it's too much below that. And your body has to get used to, 6 pounds per square inch when you're used to 14, and all of a sudden at 6, you would, in theory, you could experience the bends where the oxygen and nitrogen that's dissolved in your blood because of the action of your lungs and so forth. Now you have less pressure all around your body, so those gases would tend to come out of solution at a lower pressure. And if I remember my physical chemistry, so as you release the pressure in a pressure cooker, as you release the pressure around your body, which you don't realize, but it's 14.6 pounds per square inch. And if it drops, and it drops too fast, you get what is known as the bends. And, that's a serious condition where dissolved oxygen, nitrogen, and so forth then may come out of your blood faster than your body can absorb that. You may end up with like bubbles in the blood, so to speak. That would be a deadly condition. So you cannot. It's kind of like when you go deep. If you had a scuba tank on and you went underwater, like if you go under like 10 or 12 feet, then you got 28 pounds per square inch. So every 12 or 15 feet underwater is another 14 pounds per square inch. So when you come up, you got to come up slowly, and you got to keep breathing. You don't hold your breath. So when you're underwater, the scuba training is you come up real slow, and you don't come up faster than your slowest bubbles. When you breathe out, you look at your bubbles, and you don't go faster going up than your slowest bubbles. And that's the rules. And if you do, you may experience the bends. Now, if you're underwater, below 60 feet, I believe was the parameter. If you're underwater deeper than 60 feet, you've got to stop at the 60-foot level, for 15 or 20 minutes to let your body and your body chemistry and everything get used to the fact that you have less pressure all around your body than you had when you were 120 feet under. So when you have to come up in stages, and then you got to wait, 10 or 15 minutes. Then you come up another 20 or 30 feet, then you got to wait. So it takes time to come up. You can't just swim up, with your fins as fast as you can, because you'd end up with a serious case of the bends, and that could be a deadly affair. In which case, they put you in a pressure chamber. Now if that were to happen, not because of anyone's fault, but because you got blown out of a submarine or something. I don't know what story I could give, but if you suddenly had to come up, because if you stay down, you die. And if you come up with the bends, it's better than not coming up at all. So, and they had to be ready for you and immediately put you in a pressure chamber so that they can repressurize your body and then slowly decrease the pressure so that your blood chemistry will balance itself with, sea level 14.6 pounds per square inch. Anyway, the capsule runs at about 6 psi. They have leaks, and I can't tell if the leaks have anything to do with the pressurization of the capsule itself, or it's just like helium leaks. And you see these, when they're lining up to get in, connect itself to the space station, at a certain port, and these magnetic things, latch, in a very precise way, and it's a big ring because it's large enough so that the astronauts can climb through the resultant opening. So it's it's big. It's probably 3 feet in diameter, and you got a ring all the way around. It's very precision, and it's precision, stainless steel and magnetic material, so that once it latches on, and you have some kind of seals. I don't know whether it's neoprene or rubber or something. Some polyethylene material that comprises of a seal. I don't know what kind of material survives the conditions of outer space, but they know whatever neoprene or some kind of material that survives outer space temperatures and pressures, and that's what seals up the two things, so that when they open the hatch, so to speak, you got 6 pounds per square inch, matching up with the 6 pounds per square inch in the space station, and voila, the port door opens, without a slam and a bang, because the pressurizations are equal, and that information is verified before the port door is unlocked. So that's what goes there. So they have these other leaks, and the problem with these other leaks is now 4 or 5 of the leaks are found in the thrusters that are used to either align the capsule or manage the direction and the angle. Because this thing is both these systems, both these the capsule and the space station, it's rotating. It's because of the gravitational field of the Earth, they're moving at like 17,000 or 18,000 miles an hour, in a I'm going to say clockwise direction around. I don't think it's a polar orbit. I don't know what the angle of the dangle is of the space station, but it's some kind of an orbit around the Earth, and it's in order for the space station to not to get involved with our atmosphere. There's enough what is known as centripetal acceleration. This fancy word. The spacecraft have to be, at the altitude that it's at, which is several hundred miles above Earth. Let's say 250 miles above Earth. It's moving at 17,000 miles an hour relative to some spot on Earth. Now, that's what the space station is doing, because it's a low Earth orbit of, let's say, 250 miles up, which is, not that high up above the Earth, but it's still 250 miles above. It's above the atmosphere. Now, if you want to put a satellite up, like in geosynchronous orbit, like the satellites that are used to transmit signals to Earth, like that we use to receive cable TV and all that kind of stuff, these television channels, those are broadcasted up to a geosynchronous satellite, and then they're retransmitted back down to Earth. Because it's and those satellites, a geosynchronous orbit means that it's up in the sky, and it's the same place all the time. Well, it has to, in order for the centripetal acceleration to equate to the speed of the rotation of the Earth, because the Earth is revolving around its axis at around 1,100 miles an hour. Okay, and since the circumference of the Earth is 25,000, meaning what's the length of the whole diameter of the Earth? If you put a tape measure all the way around the circumference of the Earth, that's around 25,000 miles. Well, if it's 1,100 miles an hour, that's how you have the Earth goes all the way around, once every 24 hours. If you're wondering where that 24 hours came from. Well, the Earth is revolving around its axis from west to east. So I'm looking east. The Earth is rotating in that direction, straight in front of you, at 1,100 miles an hour. And the atmosphere kind of revolves, around that too, because of the friction with the materials, trees and canyons and mountains and so forth around the Earth. The atmosphere moves, around the Earth at, usually around the same speed. So that's what a geosynchronous orbit would be. Like for satellites that deal with telecommunications, cell signals, like cellular telephones and all that, they transmit information back and forth through geosynchronous satellites connectivity. That's how that works. So a lot of your TV signals and your cellular systems work with satellites that are geosynchronous orbits. Now, Elon Musk has launched, would you believe, 6,000 smaller satellites that are revolving around the Earth in a matrix kind of a pattern, a known pattern, so it gets very crowded up here in outer space because you got all these things rotating around, revolving around the Earth. Polar orbits, not polar orbits, and Elon has a whole array of different orbital not in the altitude, but in the aspect of how it rotates around the Earth. So it's either a polar orbit or an equatorial orbit or a reverse polar orbit. I don't think they have any reverse ones, but the satellites are there's 6,000 of them. You know, every couple of 100 miles there's another satellite, and they're all locked in at a very specific. You know, they're all arm's length to each other. Yeah, let's say a couple 100 miles, and I'm making that up. I don't know how many meters apart they are, but they're not real close together. They're, kilometers apart. I don't know if it's 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers, which is 3,000 meters. It's it's all calculated on a complex computer scenario, algorithms that place these satellites in various positions, and they squeeze them in so they're arm's length or half arm's length, using that as just a figure of speech. But anyway, he's got 6,000 satellites. They're not all in the same orbit. They could be, let's say it's a polar orbit and it keeps stepping down. And he creates this matrix of satellites so that no matter where you are on Earth, so to speak, you can connect with one of SpaceX's orbital, low orbit satellites for cellular connectivity directly to satellites. My iPhone actually has a capability of connecting with the Starlink satellites. So that you're up, in the mountains in Montana, and you don't have a signal with any cellular system or any other system, excuse me, you connect with the Starlink satellites, and there's a little procedure that I can use with the iPhone and point it up in the sky, and it'll respond back to you, tell you which way to point the phone, turn it a little bit more this way, a little more that way, and you got arrows lining up, and you can aim it in the right direction. So you're aiming it right at one of the Starlink satellites, and it'll tell you which one to aim it at, on the horizon. This way or that way or whatever kind of, and there's an application, that's part of the operating system of the iPhone. And it's not like a separate thing you got to do, except when you want to access the Starlink satellites, you have to be out of range of any of your traditional antennas, or else it won't activate, the Starlink access. And you can text over it and you can voice over it, but that's it. You can't, play on the internet or any of that kind of stuff. This is strictly for, semi-emergency usage. Like, honey, I'm going to be late for dinner. I just slid down, a 600-foot mountain, whatever. So if you're going to send somebody a text message or call someone and speak briefly, you can get into the direct access with the satellites. That's available now, they've sold millions of these phones, iPhone 15 Pro phones, and they have access to the satellites. And, so that's pretty good. So if you're in somewhere where you don't have cellular connectivity, you can be in the middle of somewhere in Colorado and your car breaks down and you're like STUC, you're stuck. You can call for help right with the satellite system, because if you're not near a satellite antenna, a cellular service antenna, then you're SOL with your iPhone. It says, no signal. Well, with the iPhone 15 Pro phones, or Pro Max phones, I believe, both those, you can access the satellites, the Starlink satellites, because you don't have any cellular service. And I think it kind of does that automatically. And then you may have to do a little aiming, and it'll tell you if you need to. I believe that's how that works. And, that's pretty cool. So you never have to worry about being without or you could be in a certain situation where the cellular system gets knocked out for some reason. You're in a storm area and your cellular systems are just down. Well, you, with your phone, once the storm passes, with your phone, you can aim it up into the, into the sky, and it'll pick up a satellite and, or two, so that you can make your emergency communication. Hey, Mom, we're okay down here. Everything got blown away, but I'm speaking through a satellite. That could be a text message or something. So, we're really progressing quite along here in the year 2024. But in the next couple of days, and anyway, so these guys are up in space. They can't get back until, sometime in July. I believe the maximum duration of this trip to them, although it's only supposed to be 8 days, could be 45 days. And then they'd start eating into some of the excess, some of the reserve fuel, water, and so forth, the crew that's in the space station. So there are only 2 astronauts, but they got to get out of there, and they got to get out of there in a few days. So hopefully they can figure out how to patch, or stop some of this leaking, so that the craft has enough fuel in it, pressurized gas, whatever it is, so that these aligning rockets can keep that spacecraft at the proper angle of attack into the atmosphere, so that it'll gradually come back to Earth with, I don't know if it's an ocean-based landing or a land-based landing with, parachutes. Either way, probably another extra parachute if you're gonna, just bang down on the desert somewhere. I don't know what that plan is, actually. And I think the astronauts are just. If I were them, I don't know what the nature of the leaks are, where they are. I'm sure these astronauts are getting detailed reports from NASA on what's going on with the leaks, because the computers are showing that there is leakage, in 5 different locations or systems, or both. So, and they're examining the data slowly, because this breaking away from the space station and then hitting a retro rocket that's on the blunt face of that space capsule, so that, so if you're going 18,000 miles an hour, you aim, you kind of like reverse aim the spacecraft, so that it's going to slow you down rather than speed you up. Let's put it that way. Because if you apply the energy in the wrong direction, you will go in higher orbit than the space station itself, which you don't want to do that. You're trying to get lower and lower orbit, which means you want to slow your craft down. So you have to get it pointed in the opposite direction from which you came. You're going to go back that way. So you have to slow yourself down in relation to the ground speed. Oops, this is the silence thing, ringer thing. So anyway, I'd be worried about those two astronauts coming down in a spacecraft. This is the first time it's had, a launch of a manned spacecraft, and it's 2 years late to blast off to begin with because of all kinds of other production issues. And then it had, 2 attempts to even connect itself to the space station. And now they discover 5 leaks. Oh, God. Can you send me up another one? I'd be worried about getting back in this sucker because it's got leaks everywhere. And God knows, when it's coming back through the atmosphere, that is a super high stress, So how many leaks are going to happen when that thing goes under the stress of entering Earth's atmosphere? And, that's another whole bunch of systems that have to control that. And they know how to do it. The question is, can this capsule do it? And I assume previously they've had some test runs, but that's, whew. So that's, probably the next couple of weeks. That's going to be, hopefully they get back to Earth safely. What was that message? Launch alert in your... Oh, I don't know what that is. So, here's something interesting. Right here. I had a few more news points and they'll go away. China has just returned the first ever samples from the far side of the moon. The moon rotates around the Earth. The Earth revolves around its own axis, but other projectiles rotate around the Earth. Well, and the Earth revolves at, one time a day, right? Every day, it's one full cycle of its revolution. All right. Which is, remember, 1,100 miles an hour. So if you're standing up in sunny Boca Raton, Florida, and you stick your finger way up, it's 1,100 miles an hour. You don't feel the breeze because the atmosphere is revolving around it too, with it. Generally the same speed. That's that whole, movement is what, along with temperature, and seawater temperature, and, which creates, the atmospheric conditions that we deal with. Sometimes it's stormy and sometimes it's sunny, and sometimes it's in between. So that's. So China has just returned. Anyway, so the moon doesn't revolve. It's always looking. The face of the moon is always looking at the surface of the Earth. And now the moon, moves around the Earth in an orbit that takes around 28 days, something like that. 29 days. Yeah, there's 30 days in a month, 29 days in February. So it's moving around, in orbit around the Earth at, one time a month is a full cycle, so to speak. So 12 times a year it does that. That's how we, the Christian calendar came up with the months, the days of the week and the days and all that stuff. So, this this little jewel has just come back to Earth from the far side of the moon, and it has produced some samples of what's on the back side of the moon, the part of the moon that we never see, because the moon does not, revolve around its own axis. It has a stationary position over the Earth. And the theory of that is that there's some heavier, iron ore kind of material, some kind of magnetic material, gravitational material. That's so the internal core of the moon is not like a consistent, marble. It's lopsided. It may be perfectly round, or almost perfectly round, but the internal structure of what kind of materials are, underneath the surface of the moon, it has a lumpy interior, so to speak, and it's lumpy with regard to, there being some gravitational magnetic material that's inside the core of the moon in such a inconsistent manner, which makes the moon attract to the Earth in such a way that there's no revolutions of the moon. It's stuck, looking straight at us all the time. So if you got somebody on the face of the moon, it's going to see Earth all the time, because the moon is always looking in the same direction all the time. Now, that's not the way our space station is, because it's not in a geosynchronous orbit, but the moon is 200,000 miles up, 300,000 kilometers up, and it rotates around the Earth once a month, right? But at the face of the moon, the craters and everything that you see, that face of the moon is always facing at Earth. There is no revolving. The moon does not revolve around its own axis. There is no axis, so to speak, because it's in a geostable, just, very similar to the way like a geosynchronous orbit would be with a satellite, because it always wants to face the same way so that it's aiming its signal, right over North America, for example. And if it was moving around, then we would get signals and not have signals. If it's in a geostationary arrangement, then those antennas from the satellite that's in the geosynchronous orbit is aiming all the time at us. Like if you have direct TV, for example, you have your antenna and it's aimed directly at that satellite. And that satellite is in a geostationary position. And it has little rockets, little tiny rockets, that is controlled, by computers, in New York, I believe. And to make sure that orbit of that satellite that's directly over the tip of Texas, if you're wondering where it is, when you point that antenna up, because that satellite is directly above the tip of Texas. If you're trying to figure out on the map where, and if you were and on the tip of Texas, your satellite antenna would be looking straight up instead of like at an angle. Like here, our angle is, about a 40-degree angle aimed over the tip of Texas. And that's about how I think about it. Anyway, the moon is in the same kind of a situation where the face of the moon is always looking straight down at us. And it's so you never see the backside of the moon. Well, this Chinese satellite, this Chinese space system, went to the moon, blasted off from China, and it had a landing. Something landed on the moon, collected samples, and that something then was blasted off from the surface of the moon, went into orbit around the moon, and then then came into orbit around the Earth, and then came down on land right there in the middle of some field in China, somewhere in China. And there's a helicopter or two that has landed, and the scientists are going to come retrieve this thing. They put a flag there to let everyone know this is Chinese property, because it's out in the middle of nowhere in China somewhere, and they don't want some Mongolese people or somebody to come, take this little ball away with this prize package of samples from the dark side of the moon. And that's what that little story is. The Chinese state television broadcast images Tuesday of the capsule holding samples that came from the dark side of the moon. First ever samples from the far side of the moon is now returned to Earth. So that's, you talk about a mission impossible. They did it. Now we were on the moon, and then our guys came right back. They didn't land on the back side of the moon. They landed on the front side of the moon somewhere. I guess they should have landed on the back side of the moon. So I think we've been on the moon once. And they walked around, they took pictures, television, videos, got back on their lunar lander and then took off and connected back up with the main lunar rotating space system. And then that, rocketed away around and got out of lunar orbit and came back to Earth. Went to an Earth orbit, and then, the capsule, they climbed over into the capsule part, detached it from the other part, and came back to Earth with it so that the astronauts would get back to Earth. So, look at this. I'm looking at breaking news. Judge Merchan, the judge that put a gag order on Trump, after his trial down there in New York City, the trial of, convicted him of 34 counts, and no one had any damages. It's just like a paper trail thing, with paying his attorney. 34 times he paid his attorney, and that was 34 counts of paperwork that wasn't categorized properly. It's a legal fee, so you gotta, you got one bucket. All the legal fees go in one bucket. Well, New York City wanted more than one bucket. Well, this is legal fees, of 11 years ago. You can't go back in time and change the buckets. So they tried and said, well, you're guilty. 34 counts of whatever. And, there's no damages. In other words, no one got hurt by this. Usually when a legal system comes after a person, it's because they broke a law. Well, this law has never been challenged in court ever, much less challenged against, a former president, for God's sakes. So this is why Trump, our former president, has been convicted of something, and in New York City, it's 34 counts of not labeling something that happened 11 years ago, and it was a legal fee, and the lawyer sends a bill, and it's got all these reasons for the bill, but all those reasons don't become separate general ledger account things, or else you'd have a million different ledger accounts. So you got the lawyer did this and he did that, and he has phone expense and he got that expense, and he puts it all down on an invoice and comes in, and then they pay, and that's what the legal fees are. All right. You don't keep track of their expenses. It all comes into one bucket called legal fees. And Stormy gets messed up in that somehow because Trump never signed an agreement with Stormy Daniels. It was the legal department of Trump that, made an arrangement in private with her. The lawyer signed it, not Trump. Stormy Daniels signed it and said, I never did anything with Trump. I promise, before God and everyone else, she signed it, notarized it, and she received $130,000, gratuity for swearing that she didn't do anything with Donald Trump 11 years ago. And then she decided sometime after that to break her promise and say, oh yeah, there were some things that went on. But, she's been paid for it. I mean, they could sue her, for breach of contract. Because everyone has, employment agreements. They're all confidentiality agreements. I think that's what they call that. And you promise not to give up, like I was in the banking business. I promise not to give up bank secrets. I promise not to divulge any of the private information with my clients about, whatever. All right. We've been on the air here for an hour and 32 minutes. I think we've had enough. So it's nice to be chatting with you. There's an awful lot of news. I got into this little piece of news. There's a lot more news and things, exciting things to talk about. And we'll talk about them, maybe even tomorrow. So stay tuned. And we'll see you soon, okay? Hopefully tomorrow morning, like 10 o'clock.